Okay, so hello, my name is Daniel Mukash, and I was recently baptized last year around Christmas, and this is my testimony about my journey from the occult New Age to Christianity.
Okay, Daniel. Just some questions for you. In your outline that you've documented, can you just briefly explain your early childhood and school experience?
Okay, well, I spent my childhood. I grew up as an atheist. Both my parents were atheists, even though they had grown up Catholic and Anglican, but they were sort of atheists and liberals. So I was brought up that way, and I sort of became quite depressed because I didn't have much of a secure worldview, and it wasn't very nice. I sort of became very far removed from my friends in high school, in particular, and I was very into science and psychology and philosophy, but mainly I was just a nihilist, basically.
Could you explain what a nihilist is?
A nihilist is someone who doesn't believe in any philosophy, or someone who doesn't believe in a god or any higher power, who just believes that human beings are sort of the be-all and end-all of existence, and we attribute meaning to things externally rather than a higher God that has created us with a purpose for our lives. That's a nihilist.
Okay,
and that's what the scientific that's what the scientific worldview, the secular worldview, I was brought up taught me. So that was what I believed.
Okay, thank you. Now, in your schooling, can you explain about any physical symptoms you had growing up?
Well, I had Tourette's, mild Tourette's, and also auditory processing disorder, which made it difficult for me to take in information. But also, I was also vaccinated with a, I can't remember exactly what it was. It was in school and it was mandatory. And then after that vaccination, I had what the doctors called a non-epileptic fit, which meant that I was basically spasming for pretty much all night, the same night that I took the vaccine, and that was quite a scary experience. But yeah.
And you can actually say it was the vaccine that actually caused these symptoms?
Of course, I don't have any way to prove that it did, but if we put two and two together, I had the vaccine. I did have mild Tourette's, and the very same night that I had the vaccine, I had these spasms, and it lasted the whole night, and I had never had any experience like that prior to that event. It was only maybe a year later, when I was very, very stressed because of my GCSEs, I had another tic attack, but a non-epileptic fit, but it wasn't nearly as bad as that first time.
Okay. You mentioned MMR that you had. Can you explain that? Can you remember that experience? Did that have a MMR, measles, mumps and rubella, in year 9? You said this in your testimony.
Was that the vaccine that I had?
Yes, that was MMR is a vaccine for.
I think that, yeah, that's probably what the vaccine was for. Yeah.
Right, and then you suffered.
Yeah, those symptoms.
Okay. All right. And can you explain your experiences during lockdown in 2020 onwards?
So, yeah, in lockdown, I was just beginning my university course. I was studying psychology at the University of East Anglia. Well, for the first year I was at the University of Essex, and that was in the first year of lockdown that happened, and it was a very, very depressing experience. We weren't allowed to go out, and we were basically confined to our student accommodation, and it just wasn't very pleasant at all. I don't think anybody enjoyed it. I ended up leaving the university, going back home about halfway through the course, like most people did, but I still continued on with the course.
Okay. In your testimony, your written testimony, you say you were looking for meaning. Can you expound on that, please?
Well, like I said, I was a nihilist, and I had bouts of depression that was sort of. It was something that I couldn't control. I had these phases I would go through where I was just so depressed and so felt that I had absolutely no meaning. That it was torturous, really. That and I went through these long periods. Other times I was a lot happier, and I could sort of cope with reality, but other times I just couldn't. So I sort of strive to find some meaning by exploring various different mystical traditions, things like Hinduism and Buddhism, and also Western mystical traditions, sort of like Hermeticism and various forms of Gnosticism. Very eclectic and esoteric things, but I found that they were the things that sort of sustained me spiritually, because I just found some of their philosophies quite intriguing in how logical they were, because I was a very logical person, a very rational person, so I found a lot of their arguments and philosophies to be quite logical.
Okay. You make reference in your testimony to the Rockefeller system of schooling. Can you explain to our viewers and subscribers what this system is about in your experience?
So when I finished high school, I was totally disenfranchised with the high school, with high school, and with the state education system which I'd grown up in, and I, couldn't help but do research on, why it seemed so counterproductive. And even though I did quite well in my education, I thought that there seemed to be so much wrong with it. And I came across this guy called John Taylor Gatto, who was a teacher, and he wrote explicitly about this stuff. And he actually won loads of awards for being a really great teacher in America. And he wrote a great book called Weapons of Mass Instruction, where he goes over all the different, all the aspects of modern education which are really outdated and were basically designed to create a working class, not designed to not designed for this system where we need more independent thinkers, because obviously we're living in more of a digital age and less of a industrial revolution age. But those systems were created by the Rockefeller, were funded primarily by Rockefellers, who are still a banking dynasty family in America, and they created those systems specifically for a workforce, a obedient, complicit workforce, and not to produce independent thinkers who have critical thinking skills. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I was intrigued that you seem to know about the Battle of Waterloo. We've been taught about that in history, but you seem to have gone a bit further than that. So can you explain to us what you know about the Battle of Waterloo and why it's relevant?
Well, it's interesting, it's not just the Battle of Waterloo, but when you do research, obviously when you learn about history in school, you hear about the various nations warring against each other and all this stuff, but you don't hear about some of the biggest players who financed revolutions, who financed wars, who propagated conflict between nations. And what we're really talking about here is these big international bankers who started popping up around the 18th century, and one of the major players was not Rockefeller, was Rothschild, and it's interesting. Some people seem to think that the Rothschilds funded both sides of the Battle of Waterloo between Napoleon and the British Army. Well, it wasn't just the British; it was a few other people as well. I haven't found much evidence for that, but what I have found a lot of evidence for is the fact that Rothschild, who was made of these four big bankers. Nathan Rothschild was the main player of these four. Funded Napoleon in his uprising, and also helped to destabilize the French monarchy, so that there would be a revolution, and they basically chose. They basically funded the empire building of Napoleon, ultimately to destroy him by funding the British the British army to defeat him in the Battle of Waterloo. So they made a lot of money on that, and it's quite well documented that this actually happened. There's a great book called what is it called? I forget the name, but it's about this. It's by this Russian guy, Count something or other, and he goes through a lot of this stuff. I can't remember the name.
Okay, all right. In your document, you seem to be concerned about drinking local tap water. Could you explain what is going on with your local water?
So a big part of my sort of spiritual development was changing my eating habits and changing my drinking habits. So I bought a water filter because I found out from this website called truthaboutfluoride.com that British tap water and tap water across the world in many different countries, especially in America, they have the highest concentration of fluoride, and also in Canada and some other places. Britain isn't so high, but it's still significant. That fluoride is basically this waste product that is created from industrial waste, and what it does essentially, specifically sodium fluoride, and then there's a few other types, but they're all very harmful. They interfere with our ability to produce hormones it interferes with our regulation of hormones, especially in the adrenal gland, which is the central hormone production center in the body that goes all the way down to our spine and produces hormones around our body. It basically it has very bad effects on us. It also disintegrates bone structure. It and I think there were some scientific studies on frogs, and they found that that a male frog introduced to a who is given water with lots of fluoride in it actually changes its gender, and the female frogs change their gender because of the dysregulation of hormones, which is just unbelievable. So if you think about that's what's happening to amphibians, what on earth is it doing to human beings?
What was your personal experience? Because you mentioned about headaches that you had and your pineal gland. Can you just explain that a little bit, please?
Oh yeah, I suffered from headaches when I was younger, and that was. I always noticed that it would flare up when I was drinking water, and then I noticed that when I drank water, I actually became more thirsty than when I hadn't drank it. And turns out that fluoride actually makes you want to drink more water, so it's pretty insidious. So I had severe headaches when I was younger, and as soon as I started filtering my water, the filter that I use is clearly filtered. I also, with the help of John here, the cameraman, we get well water from someone in our local area, which is from the groundwater. It's not connected to Anglia water. So those are two sources of much purer and safer drinking water. And since then, no headaches at all.
Okay. You said you believed you were under the influence of demons and sin. So could you explain what that is, please?
Mm-hmm. So at the time when I was studying and practicing various occult and mystical traditions, I was involved heavily with the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn practices, and also some yoga, specifically Kundalini yoga, and various breathwork techniques in Hinduism and Buddhism. And so what I found out after becoming Orthodox was that when you do these various poses, when you're doing Kundalini yoga, what you're really doing is worshipping these Hindu gods by basically by doing their poses, and it, in the Old Testament it says that these fallen angels had sought to be worshipped themselves, and they're basically demons. So it's a pretty safe bet to say that these Hindu gods were just deceptive spirits and demons. So that was one way. I was also doing the certain rituals from the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which was a society established around about 1800s, who Aleister Crowley was a member of, John W.D. Yeats, various poets and mystics. And what it was a mystery school to learn these ancient traditions that were all basically taking traditions from different religions and packing them into one, because that's what I was really interested in, finding the truth behind all these different traditions. And I was doing what was called the Hermetic Order. I was doing the lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram, which was a way to banish lesser energies for deeper concentration into whatever I was trying to accomplish, whether it was writing or art or whatever. But there was a great spiritual cost to all this, because I didn't have the protection of Christ. I didn't even necessarily believe that Christ was God. I believed that he was a teacher of sorts, but I didn't believe he was God incarnate. And so I was basically, it got to a point where I wasn't possessed by demons, because I was oppressed. I was oppressed by them because it got to the point where I was getting these powerful delusions sent to me that were telling me that I was. It sounds so stupid to say, thinking back to it, but I was getting these delusions telling me that I was the Antichrist, and that all these terrible, terrible negative thoughts that I was beyond salvation. I couldn't be saved because I had done all these occult rituals, and it got to the point where I was convinced that I was going to hell, basically.
Okay. And can you explain how the Orthodox Church freed you from this demonic activity? How did they do that?
Well, I tried various forms of Christianity. None of it really seemed to appeal or really do much. But then I decided, right, if I'm gonna try and seek out the church, I'm gonna seek out the true church. I found Orthodoxy, and I attended services, and I was like, right, this is the true church. I was absolutely blown away by its beauty and its ancient. I knew that this was something very, very old and very deep and very ancient. And so I just said, look, I need salvation. I need help. I am seriously ill with these demons, with these delusions, and I need some sort of deliverance. And simply saying, because I was researching how to be delivered from demons through accepting Christ. I was told just accept Christ as your Lord and Savior, and that did help a little bit, but not as much as actually attending the liturgy and learning more about Orthodoxy. I think that was really the crux of it.
And what about the baptism? And did that release it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. After I became a catechumen, once I was baptized, that was it. I was freed from all these influences. I didn't hear any voices or delusions or anything. It was pure freedom in Christ.